58 mercenaries poured into a desert town, trapping 20 seals. In the marketplace, with terrified families caught in the crossfire. Air support denied, ammo almost gone. 1 more minute and the team was finished. Then, a single shot cracked from the top of a rusted water tower no one believed could be climbed, and the heavy gun shredding the seals went silent. Who was she? Not a seal, not a savior from the sky, but a woman they mocked as porcelain, fragile, dead weight. How did she turn a slaughter into survival, and why did her bullets rewrite the future of that town? Stay with us, because this is the moment a simple woman sniper became the ghost of the desert. Hit subscribe to A Simple Woman Stories so you never miss the legends they tried to bury. 58 mercenaries stormed into the desert town just as the evening sun burned low over the horizon. The streets, normally buzzing with vendors selling dates and spices, fell into chaos. Mothers clutched children, merchants abandoned their carts, and the air filled with the thunder of gunfire. In the middle of that storm, 20 seals huddled for cover inside the market square, pressed against clay walls and overturned stalls, their ammo count falling with every passing second. Air support had been denied. Their comms were jammed. For every enemy they dropped, 5 more seemed to appear, pouring out of alleys and across rooftops with ruthless precision. Captain Noah Pierce shouted orders, his voice raw. "Hold the line, keep civilians clear. Rourke, watch that corner." His words barely cut through the deafening rattle of heavy machine gun fire, hammering their position. Chief Liam Rourke, the team's primary sniper, squeezed the trigger, but his shot went wide, ricocheting off stone. He slammed the bolt shut, sweat streaming down his face. Too much movement, too many of them. The 50 caliber gun, mounted on the back of a technical, tore apart the market's walls, ripping clay into dust clouds, every burst closer to cutting down seals who were already running dry. 1 more minute, maybe 2, and they'd be wiped out in the middle of a town filled with terrified families. Ethan Ward, the youngest on the team, crouched low, his rifle trembling in his grip. His whisper was barely audible over the storm. "Dear God, save us." Then it happened. A single shot cracked from high above, different in timbre from the surrounding chaos. Calm, deliberate, almost surgical. The heavy machine gun shredding the square went silent as its gunner collapsed sideways, his body slamming against the mounted weapon. Confusion rippled through the mercenary ranks. Another shot followed, clean through the chest of a fighter about to lob a grenade into the crowd of fleeing civilians. The SEALs looked up. Through the haze of dust and smoke, a lone figure was prone atop the rusted water tower on the edge of town. The structure had been written off as unstable, its ladder half gone, the upper platforms corroded. No one thought it could even be climbed. Yet, there she was, Arden Shaw, the woman the team had mocked as Porcelain. Fragile, a comms specialist with no place among them. Noah's chest tightened as he recognized her silhouette through the glare. "Impossible," he muttered, but impossible had just saved their lives. 6 months earlier, no one on that team would have believed it. Arden had arrived at Coronado Base with little fanfare, her orders stamped by Admiral Jonas Caldwell himself. Officially, she was embedded as a communications specialist, tasked with handling encrypted channels during field deployments. Off the record, Pierce hated the idea. He had looked her over, slight frame, quiet demeanor, too young, and dismissed her before she said a word. Porcelain, he called her during the first team brief. Looks solid until it breaks. The men laughed, and the nickname stuck. She didn't argue. She simply nodded, found her bunk, and endured the sideways glances. Training was merciless, and Pierce made it worse. He handed her the heaviest packs, doubled her radio drills, sent her running extra laps in the surf. She never complained. On the range, her rounds cut neat clusters into targets, but no one cared. They dismissed her as a fluke, a hobbyist who would crack under pressure. The kill house proved them right, or so they thought. They had flooded it with strobe lights, smoke, screaming audio files of women crying and children yelling. Gunfire echoes looped through hidden speakers, a storm of chaos designed to break focus. Arden faltered, her breathing spiked, her shot scattered wide, her hands shook as she tried to reload. By the time she stumbled out, the men were already laughing. Pierce shook his head. Fragile. You won't last a mission. But she refused to give them the satisfaction of tears. That night, while the barracks slept, she returned to the kill house alone. She dragged in speakers, set off flashbangs, pumped smoke until the walls disappeared. Then she forced herself through it again, and again, until her eyes watered, her ears rang, and her body begged her to stop. She didn't. She lay prone in the dark, listening to how the smoke shifted with the ventilation. How sound warped in the haze, how her own breath moved the air around her. She began to hear things others ignored, the subtle whistle of air through broken beams, the way heat distorted the shimmer above lights, the rhythm of chaos itself. On the third night, Pierce caught her at it. He stood in the shadows, watching as she fired in near darkness, each shot snapping through the same hole. He said nothing. When she noticed him, he only turned and left. He didn't believe in her yet, but he couldn't ignore her discipline. Now, in the market square of a forgotten desert town, that discipline became salvation. Arden lay prone atop the corroded water tower, her Barrett resting steady against the rusted beams. From that vantage, the entire town unfolded like a map. She adjusted for the wind, tricky in the desert. Heat rising from the sand created mirages, bending the air, pulling bullets off course. But she had trained for this. She tasted the shift of the breeze, felt the rhythm of its cycle against her skin. She timed her breathing to it. Her next shot split through the barrel of an RPG launcher just as the mercenary fired. The round exploded mid-launch, the fireball consuming the gunner's squad in a blaze that sent others scattering. Who the hell? Rourke's voice cracked in disbelief. He steadied his own rifle but couldn't keep up. That's not possible. It's her, Noah said, low, almost to himself. His chest twisted. He had dismissed her, mocked her, written her off. And now she was holding their entire team together. The mercenaries regrouped fast. Their leader, Viktor Sokolov, barked orders in Russian-accented English, his voice carrying across the square. Sniper! Water tower! Suppress! Bullets ripped into the tower, chipping rust and stone, the whole structure trembling under the barrage. Arden didn't flinch. She shifted, rolled to her left and fired again. Another target down. She was methodical, precise, every round chosen, no wasted motion. Noah rallied his men, inspired by the rhythm of her shots. Echo, on my mark. Shift right, use the civilians as cover, keep them safe. They moved in sync with her fire, her bullets carving openings through the swarm of mercenaries. Ethan looked up through the smoke, eyes wide, whispering again, "Dear God, save us." Then louder, with awe, "She's saving us." The battle for the desert town had only begun, but the tide had shifted. One woman, mocked as Porcelain, had just become the fulcrum on which survival balanced. 6 months before the chaos in the desert town, Arden Shaw was already a paradox to those who met her. At 28, she was young, quiet and unassuming, yet every movement was deliberate, every glance measured. Her arrival at SEAL Team Echo had been met with skepticism, if not outright disdain. Captain Noah Pierce had received the order from Admiral Jonas Caldwell, and, the words on the file seemed almost cruel, comms specialist Arden Shaw. Do not underestimate. Pierce had studied the dossier, then looked up at her, expecting to see an inexperienced, delicate officer who would crumble under pressure. Instead, he saw a woman calm in a way that unnerved him. Her nickname, Porcelain, had been coined on the first day of training. It started as a joke, whispered in corners of the barracks, then spread like wildfire. The men laughed at her pale frame, at the way she carried herself, at her meticulous attention to detail. "Porcelain won't last a week in the field," Ethan Ward had muttered, grinning. Liam Rourke had nodded, barely hiding his contempt. But Arden said nothing. She understood that words were ephemeral, only actions mattered. The kill house was the true test. Smoke poured in thick waves, strobe lights flashed incessantly, and the cacophony of screams, alarms, and simulated gunfire assaulted every sense. The exercise was designed to break even the most seasoned operators, and for Arden, it was a baptism. Her first few shots scattered wide, her hands shook under the weight of stress. A flashbang detonated too close, sending her sprawling to the ground. She looked up, and through the haze, the men laughed, echoing in the chamber like a cruel chorus. Pierce shook his head, muttering, "Fragile." That night, while the barracks slept, Arden returned to the kill house, alone. She rigged smoke grenades and speakers, blasting recorded chaos, children screaming, gunfire, alarms, simulated explosions. She immersed herself in the environment until her muscles memorized the rhythm of panic. Her breathing synchronized with the patterns of flashing light, the rise and fall of synthetic voices, the subtle vibrations of the building. She learned to read chaos as a language, a living equation. And in that silence, she began to become more than porcelain. Pierce had seen her there once, watching from the observation deck. He had expected her to fail, to cower, to break. Instead, she moved like a shadow, adjusting her aim, firing with precision despite the sensory overload. He said nothing, but in that quiet acknowledgement, he recognized something he hadn't admitted: she was exceptional. Now, 6 months later, that training was manifesting in the heart of the desert town. Arden perched atop the corroded water tower, her barret resting lightly against the rusty metal, her eye behind the scope scanning the streets below. Heat shimmered off the sand, bending the air and distorting the targets. Dust spiraled in mini-currents across the rooftops. Civilians scattered in panic, and the mercenaries moved with lethal precision, closing in on the trapped SEALs. Then a shadow flickered on a nearby rooftop. Sokolov, a former Spetsnaz operator and now mercenary leader. He moved like a predator, surveying the square. Arden recognized the signature immediately, the angle of his barrel, the way his body shifted weight. To compensate for recoil, the faint glint of a mirror used for reflection and deception. He was skilled, experienced, and utterly lethal. Arden didn't flinch. She had trained for this, months of living in simulated chaos, of counting the rhythm of air currents, of reading micro-movements in targets. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger, her eye tracing Sokolov's subtle shifts. She could see the outline of his rifle through a break in the rooftop debris, but she also noted the civilians moving below. One wrong shot, and they would pay the price. The first shot came from Sokolov. A sharp crack echoed off the adobe walls, splintering a beam inches from her shoulder. Arden rolled behind the support strut, her mind calculating trajectories, ricochet angles, and wind currents. The desert wind was unpredictable, rising from pockets of hot sand, curling around corners of the town's low buildings. She adjusted for every factor. Rourke called over the comms, voice tight. "Arden, he's a trained sniper. He'll pick you apart if you expose yourself," she whispered back, calm. "I'm not exposed. I'm invisible in the rhythm." The duel escalated. Bullets tore into the tower around her, but she didn't move unnecessarily. Instead, she shifted her body just enough to change her angle, keeping her presence a ghost to the counter-sniper. She waited for the rhythm, the next gust, the sway of a rusted panel, the echo of the gun below, to open her window. Below, the SEALs tried to move the wounded toward cover, the civilians screaming and running through the narrow alleys. Pierce shouted directions, trying to coordinate movements while keeping his team alive. Arden's first shot found its mark. The ricochet hit Sokolov's cover, knocking him slightly off balance. His head snapped up, eyes narrowing, realizing he had been spotted, but only barely. He fired again, faster this time, trying to anticipate her next move. Arden shifted her breathing, counted the pulses of the wind against her cheek, and squeezed off 2 shots. The first struck a support beam near his feet, creating a loud metallic crack. The second hit the edge of a crate near the rooftop's edge. Sokolov staggered back, surprised at the precision of shots that hadn't even required direct aim. The mercenaries below began to panic, seeing their leader's position compromised. Sokolov tried to pull back, but Arden tracked him seamlessly, each movement predicted, each adjustment calculated. She fired again. The bullet struck the edge of his mirror setup, sending shards across the rooftop and blinding him temporarily. He cursed, spinning, trying to regain sight. Rourke whispered into the comm, "How is she doing that? She's impossible." Arden didn't answer. She was focused entirely on the rhythm of the wind, the alignment of the rooftops, the scattered civilians moving through the streets. She could not afford a single mistake. One miscalculation would mean disaster. Her training, once derided as obsessive, became the difference between life and death. The months of simulations, of solitary nights in the kill house, of reading chaos, like a language, now crystallized into a series of precise, controlled shots. She dropped Sokolov's first sniper team member, then his second, disrupting their coordinated fire. Panic spread through the remaining mercenaries as the windows of opportunity Arden created allowed Pierce to maneuver the SEALs closer to cover and protect civilians. Sokolov, realizing his position was compromised, tried to relocate across the rooftop. Arden adjusted instantly. She had predicted the pattern of his movement, the timing dictated by the rhythm of the desert, wind, and the shot she fired ricocheted off a nearby water tank to hit the edge of his cover. He went down hard, clattering against debris, his rifle spinning from his grasp. Below, Noah Pierce allowed himself a brief, stunned breath. "She's saving us. She's actually saving us." The first wave of mercenaries faltered, confused by the sudden elimination of their leadership. Civilians ran for cover, guided by the SEALs, who now had a narrow corridor of relative safety thanks to Arden's unseen hand from above. But Arden didn't relax. Her eyes scanned the square, the alleys, the rooftops. Another counter-sniper had to be out there. She adjusted her scope, reading the wind, the shadows, the tiniest shifts in movement that could betray an enemy. The town itself became her calculus. Every gust, every dust swirl, every echo of a footstep accounted for. The battle was far from over, but the tide had irrevocably shifted. One woman, once dismissed as fragile porcelain, had become the invisible fulcrum on which the survival of the SEALs and the civilians now balanced. The square of the desert town had become a maze of chaos and debris. Smoke from overturned carts mingled with the heat rising from the sand, creating waves of distortion that made it impossible to see more than a few meters clearly. SEAL Team Echo pressed forward cautiously, dragging the wounded behind walls, ducking under crossfire and shouting warnings to terrified civilians. Every corner they turned seemed to reveal another ambush, another enemy aiming to cut them down. Arden Shaw, perched high atop the corroded water tower, surveyed it all. Her Barrett rested lightly against the railing, her eye behind the scope trained on the streets below. She counted in her mind the timing of every gust of desert wind. 9, 10, 11 seconds, then a pulse. She knew the air currents, the way heat rippled across metal and sand, the way the bullets would travel differently depending on where they hit stone, tile, or debris. It was no longer instinct, it was calculus, a living, breathing equation of survival. Her first target, a mercenary crouched behind a crate, preparing to fire at Ethan Ward as he dragged a wounded teammate behind a barricade. Arden fired. The bullet ricocheted off the edge of a nearby water barrel, striking the mercenary in the shoulder and sending him sprawling into a heap of dust and stones. "Contact!" Rourke shouted from below, the relief in his voice barely masking disbelief. "She's actually doing it!" Arden didn't answer. She was already calculating the next trajectory. The second shot struck the edge of a steel girder, causing a cascade of sparks and noise that drew the attention of another enemy sniper. Arden adjusted, accounting for the turbulence caused by the sparks and the swirling desert dust. The sniper fired, his round tearing through the wooden slats of a nearby balcony, inches from where civilians huddled. Arden moved her aim a fraction, timing her next shot to coincide with the flicker of sunlight off the mercenary's scope. The bullet shattered the rifle, neutralizing the threat without endangering the crowd. Below, Pierce and his men advanced in what Arden had silently choreographed in her mind. She had created a corridor of safety, a moving tunnel of air and fire that allowed the SEALs to shift position without exposing themselves to lethal angles. She called it her silent shift. Every movement of the team was accounted for in the rhythm of her shots. Every gust of wind was a guide. A mercenary leader, noticing the chaos on the rooftops, tried to rush the civilians as a shield. Arden's fingers tightened around the trigger. She couldn't afford to miss. She tracked the man's shadow across the ground, calculating the exact ricochet that would disable him without striking the crowd. Her bullet hit a nearby metal post, glanced off at just the right angle, knocking the weapon from his hands and sending him sprawling to the sand. Ethan, still dragging the injured, looked up and whispered, almost in awe, "She's saving us all." Arden's attention flicked to another point. Viktor Sokolov, the counter sniper she had first engaged from the rooftop, was repositioning. He had found a new perch atop a crumbling wall, adjusting a mirror to catch glints of sunlight that would give away his position. Arden anticipated the shot, not by seeing it, but by calculating the shadows it would cast on the street below. She fired, and the bullet struck the mirror dead center, sending shards flying and forcing Sokolov to cover. He cursed, retreating behind the scant cover the town offered. The SEALs continued to move in staggered formation, using the narrow alleys and collapsed buildings Arden had effectively mapped for them. Civilians pressed themselves against walls, terrified but alive, guided by the team's shouts and Arden's suppressive fire. Every shot, every ricochet, every calculated delay in firing created openings for Pierce's men to advance without casualties among those they swore to protect. Suddenly, from the far end of the market, a figure appeared, distinct from the rest of the mercenaries. He moved with authority, signaling, giving orders. A steel-reinforced case was slung across his shoulder. Arden recognized the signature immediately. Viktor Sokolov had been a distraction. This man was the real target, the one who had orchestrated the ambush. She focused. The case, though partially obscured by mercenaries and civilians, had the unmistakable markings of a Soviet-era containment unit, a potential nuclear threat. Arden's pulse quickened. Every calculation she had made so far had led to this moment. One misfire here, one misjudgment of wind, and hundreds of innocent lives could be lost. Her earpiece crackled. Pierce's voice was tense. "Arden, that's the package. He's moving it toward the eastern exit." Arden's jaw tightened. "I see him. Hold position. Civilians clear." She adjusted for a crosswind created by the rising heat of the sand and the smoke from overturned market stalls. Her finger moved lightly over the trigger, timing the shot to intercept a critical weak point in the mercenary formation. The bullet ricocheted off a nearby water tank, hitting a support beam that caused a cascade of debris to block the enemy's path. The package carrier staggered, dropping the case momentarily, buying the SEALs precious seconds. Pierce barked orders, moving his men forward to secure the civilians and push the mercenaries back. Arden continued her calculated series of shots, taking out key positions one by one. The mercenaries were disoriented, trapped in a web she had spun invisibly across the market. Each move, each trajectory, each moment of restraint, she had predicted it all. Then the twist unfolded. Arden noticed the glint of a reflection off a drone camera hovering high above. Caldwell's voice crackled in her earpiece. "Wolf, do not engage further. Stand down immediately." Her Her stomach sank. The admiral, her superior, had intentionally cut off air support and blocked their communications. He had let the ambush occur, not to test the mercenaries, but to see her, the so-called Porcelain sniper, expose herself, to force her hand. She realized the SEALs had been bait, the civilians' safety a calculated risk in a larger unseen plan. Arden's jaw tightened. She ignored the order. She had trained too long, endured too much to be manipulated. Her shots continued, neutralizing the remaining threats, covering Pierce and his men as they finally reached a position from which they could extract the civilians safely. As Sokolov fled to regroup with the package carrier, Arden fired a ricochet shot that forced him to drop his weapon and retreat, effectively ending the immediate threat. The SEALs were alive, the civilians safe, but Arden's mind raced with the implications of what she had just uncovered. Admiral Caldwell had orchestrated the ambush. The enemy was not just the mercenaries. They were being used as tools in a game far larger than anyone had realized. Noah Pierce approached her as the dust settled. His face was pale, a mixture of disbelief and admiration. You saved all of us," he said. His voice was low, raw. "All of us, Arden. That was insane." She didn't respond immediately. Her eyes remained on the desert horizon, tracing the paths the enemy had taken, calculating where they might strike next. "This isn't over," she said quietly, almost to herself. "Not until we understand the board we're playing on." The SEALs regrouped, tending to the wounded and securing the civilians. Arden's shots had given them breathing room, but the knowledge of Caldwell's interference lingered, heavier than any physical wound. She had proven herself, transformed from the so-called Porcelain into a living force that had turned the tide of a battle that had seemed impossible. But the game was far from complete. Even as the market quieted and the civilians were led to safety, Arden remained on the tower, scanning the streets. Below, calculating, anticipating, and ready for whatever move Caldwell or anyone else might make next. The desert ghost, the team would whisper her name later, had emerged not just as a savior, but as a player in a far deeper game. The market square had finally fallen silent, save for the distant moans of the wounded and the shallow breaths of the survivors. Civilians huddled behind overturned carts, their faces pale with shock, dust and blood clinging to their skin. SEAL Team Echo gathered at the far edge of the square, bruised, exhausted, and still in disbelief. Every man and woman alive owed their lives to Arden Shaw, the woman who had been dismissed as Porcelain, the one they had underestimated from the start. Arden remained atop the rusted water tower for a moment longer, her scope lowered, but her eyes sweeping the streets below. The desert sun, now low and molten over the horizon, cast long shadows through the dust, creating an illusion of calm. But Arden knew better. The calm was temporary. The danger had been neutralized for now, but the game behind the game had only just revealed itself. Admiral Jonas Caldwell had deliberately cut off air support. He had watched from afar, letting the ambush unfold as a test, or worse, as a trap designed to see if she would act. To expose her true capability, Noah Pierce approached cautiously, his boots crunching over debris. His face was a mixture of awe, gratitude, and barely contained fury. "She cut the town a path, Arden. You kept everyone alive." His voice broke slightly under the weight of the moment. "I've never seen anything like it." Arden lowered her rifle, her hands steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through her. "It wasn't just the shooting," she said quietly. "It was timing, rhythm, reading the chaos as it moves." She gestured toward the streets, where mercenaries lay sprawled, some groaning, others unconscious. Every step, every gust of wind, every shadow. I calculated all of it. That's how I protected them. Rourke, who had been kneeling over the injured, looked up. "You weren't just reading the wind," he said. "You were reading the whole damn town. Every movement, every living thing, every enemy. And you did it without harming a single civilian." "How?" Arden's lips pressed together in a faint smile, a momentary break in her stoic expression. Because I didn't just learn to shoot, I learned to listen, to wait, to respect life while navigating death. Noah nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of her words. I've seen death in my life. I've fought my way out of ambushes and firefights before, but this, he shook his head, this was something else. Then a comms crackle interrupted the fleeting calm. A static-laden voice spoke, controlled, measured. Arden Shaw, stand down. That was your final order from Admiral Caldwell. Step away from the target. The blood drained from her face. Caldwell's voice carried over the battlefield, calm and authoritative, as if the chaos around them were nothing but a simulation. She clenched her fists. I don't obey orders that risk innocent lives, she whispered. Noah stepped closer, his own anger simmering. He set us up, didn't he? He let them ambush us to test you, to test our loyalty, and now he wants you to step aside. Arden didn't answer, her eyes fixed on the last remaining mercenary movements. In that moment, she realized the full magnitude of the game she had been thrust into. The SEALs had been bait, the civilians had been collateral, Caldwell had orchestrated. It all to see whether she would follow his orders or think for herself. She breathed in the desert air, hot and dusty, feeling the tension coil through her body. Then we finish it our way, she said, her voice low but resolute. Using the tower's vantage point, she scanned the remaining targets. Her mind worked quickly, sequencing shots in a chain reaction. The first round disarmed a mercenary aiming a rifle at civilians. The second shattered a doorframe as another attempted to flee with explosives. Each ricochet, each carefully timed shot, neutralized threats while leaving the townspeople untouched. Noah and Rourke coordinated below, guiding the SEALs through the now partially cleared alleys. Civilians followed, moving silently, trusting the rhythm Arden had imposed, the silent shift she had devised, the staggered movement of the team in harmony with the wind, and her shots allowed them to navigate safely through zones that moments before had been death traps. Finally, Arden's eye caught movement at the edge of the square, Caldwell's operative. The last mercenary, still attempting to move the steel case, hesitated. Arden adjusted her scope, calculating distance, wind and trajectory. She fired, hitting the support beam nearby. The case fell harmlessly to the ground, rolling a few feet before coming to a stop. Caldwell's orders had been defied, the package was neutralized, and the threat ended without further casualties. Noah approached her, panting, his face streaked with dust and sweat. You just did what no one else could, Arden. No one. You saved every one of us, every civilian in this square, and you did it on your own terms. Arden climbed down from the tower, her movements deliberate but weary. She passed by the injured, giving quick nods of reassurance. Her mind, however, was already calculating the consequences. Caldwell had watched, had manipulated, and now he knew she had disobeyed. The battle might be over, but the war behind the war, the one she was now a part of, was just beginning. They regrouped at the edge of the town. Civilians, exhausted but alive, began moving toward safety. The SEALs secured the wounded, but even in the relief of survival, tension lingered. Arden's eyes scanned the horizon. Somewhere beyond the edge of the town, Caldwell was waiting, calculating his next move. Noah pulled her aside, voice low. We can't leave it like this. He set us up from the start. He doesn't care about anyone but the mission, and maybe not even that. He's playing a longer game. Arden nodded, her expression unreadable. I know, but we won today. That counts for something. She held the moment, letting the weight of their survival sink in, knowing that what she had done here would be remembered, not as a victory ordered by superiors, but as a triumph born from skill, patience, and choice. As the sun dipped behind the desert horizon, casting long shadows over the sand and stone, the SEALs gathered around her. Pierce placed a hand on her shoulder. You weren't Porcelain, he said quietly. You were the one who made the impossible happen, and we owe you more than we can ever repay. Arden looked down at the town, at the civilians who had trusted them, at the streets still, strewn with debris, and finally allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile. The desert ghost, the one they had underestimated, had turned the tide. She had rewritten the rules of the battlefield without sacrificing her conscience, and for the first time in months, she felt the weight in her chest ease slightly. The battle was over. The team had survived. The town, scarred but intact, owed its lives to a single woman's discipline, courage, and unwavering resolve. Yet Arden knew this was only one chapter of a much larger story. Caldwell's manipulations, the shadowy network he protected, and the moral complexities of command would not disappear overnight. As helicopters approached for extraction, the SEALs secured the civilians and the wounded. Noah glanced at Arden, awe and respect written across his face. "You saved all of us. Today, you weren't just a sniper. You were a sentinel, a ghost, and a legend." Arden looked once more over the rooftops and the dusty streets. "I'll always be here," she said softly, "but not for anyone's orders, only for those who need protecting." And with that, the desert ghost descended from the tower, leaving the town behind. The story of Arden Shaw, the woman who defied expectations, outnumbered enemies, and reshaped the fate of an entire community, would be whispered among soldiers and civilians alike for years to come. It was a legend born of skill, courage, and choice, the one shot that saved lives and the conscience that guided it. And that's how Arden Shaw, the desert ghost, turned an impossible ambush into survival for her team and for an entire town. Her courage, precision, and sheer willpower remind us that heroes can appear in the most unexpected forms. Thank you so much for watching. Did Arden make the right choice by defying orders, or was it her skill with the rifle that truly saved everyone? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one and love hearing what you think. If you want to see more unbelievable stories of bravery, make sure to subscribe to A Simple Woman's Stories and ring the bell so you never miss the next adventure. And before you go, check out the videos on your screen now. Each one brings another jaw-dropping tale you won't want to miss.